Halloween, everyone! So last year I had an idea to do a sort of Halloween video where I take a critical look at some of my personal favorite horror games and give my general thoughts on them, but as you might have guessed by now, I'm a lazy f***. So I ended up not having the time / not having the patience to make a Halloween video for 2021, or really any holiday-themed content in general. So in order to ensure that I actually get it done this year, I've decided to focus all my attention into making a Halloween special. I mean, how long could a project like this reasonably take? Today we're talking about horror games. Why do people like this kind of game? It's weird, right? Like, you wouldn't think that eliciting such a strongly negative emotion like fear would be something people would sought after, but people do this, and that's because it's more complicated than that. There are a lot of very important things that you have to consider when creating a popular piece of media, be it a novel, a movie, a show, or even a video game. Stuff like length, impact, art style, brand recognition, resources, message, entertainment value, audience interaction, writing, plot, and narrative direction, the audience you cater to, pacing and key points, grip, editing, and new drafts, setting, and most importantly of all, copyright. I could go on for a while, but you probably get the point. It's not a simple process by any means. There's a lot that you have to consider when you're making something with the intent of it being enjoyed by someone else. One that I feel is especially important is impact and feel. Simply put, is your content engaging to view? Does it elicit emotions in the viewer that makes them want to come back for more? See, there's a difference between genuine fear and scary, and that may not make sense because it doesn't, but let me explain. Fear is a primal instinct that comes with the sense that you are in danger, a feeling that invokes a sense of self-preservation. However, if you say the phrase, "that book is scary" or "that movie is scary," does that mean the book or movie made you scared for your own safety? Fear is an emotion that is caused by being scared, however they are not one and the same because there are different levels of scary. I think what scares people the most in media is anticipation and payoff. There's possibly nothing more scary than walking towards a strange noise in a supposedly empty building down a dark hallway in the middle of the night. It's the pure emotion that it brings out, the unbridled sense of adrenaline. It's that heavy feeling in your chest after a big jump scare. You're suddenly wide awake and aware, your heart is beating fast, and perhaps your hands are a tad bit tingly. It's a similar ish thing with why people ride roller coasters. The sense of anxiety you feel going up, that small sense of panic at the top, and the 3 seconds of heavy fear as you fall, and the rush of adrenaline as you fly around at 1,000 miles an hour. And the "oh thank God" feeling when it's over. It's all just wanting to feel something. Why would you watch a Let's Play instead of playing the game itself? Why watch a cooking show when you have a kitchen? Something happening on a screen can still give off the same feeling of something happening in front of you, just not as much. You play an amazing game for the first time and it's great. You watch someone else play the game and you get to see their reaction to it. Sure, it's not the same as doing it yourself, but it's still something. You can still feel some of the emotion that you felt. Think about your favorite moment from any game ever. As an example, I'll use the Sans fight from Undertale. In particular, his last line here when he's dying. When I first saw this, I felt horrible. For me, this is when the genocide run hit its peak. Sans as a character has always been semi-aware of the fact that he's in a game. When I killed him and he called out for his dead brother, it felt kinda real. I had an instance where I felt like I did a bad thing. Then after the fact, I watched other people play the game online and I saw their reactions and I had a similar feeling. I felt like someone had done a bad thing, but instead of me, it was the person I was watching. It still felt a little real, but not on the same level as what I had done, because I didn't do anything. It was this bozo on my screen. It's the same thing with horror. It's like reading about a murder versus being murdered. There's a huge difference between seeing something in real life versus on a screen. But while there is that difference, there is overlap in that difference. And I'm sure you probably know what my favorite type of the bunch is, right? Video games add one extra layer to that adrenaline. It takes you one step closer to the real thing, and it's fucking awesome. You may not be the one actually running from a monster, but you are controlling them, and that gives you a strong connection to the character and thus a strong connection to the experience itself. A video on your phone can tell you a gruesome story. So can a book. But in a game, you can't just sit back and watch. It's an interactive experience. You have to engage. However, it's interesting though, because I feel what makes a good normal game doesn't necessarily make a good horror game. Horror games are an interesting case. If you're playing a game and the controls are weird, or if it's kind of boring, or if the gameplay just isn't very engaging, then yeah, it's a bad game, objectively. But I've seen and played some horror games that are just glorified hallway simulators, but they're pretty good overall. Of course, it's not as simple as just turning the lights down and giving everything snarled teeth and then everything's fine. But I do feel as though a lot of horror games kind of use the genre as a crutch of sorts, or many horror games kind of zero in on this genre and just forget about gameplay. And in my personal opinion, it is a very common problem with even the best of horror games. For example, I recently played Happy Game and loved every second of it. The imageries and visuals are outstanding. It's a wonderfully delicious piece of environmental storytelling. But I would be lying if I said the game itself didn't get old. It's a point-and-click style game, which isn't a bad genre, but after a while, the style of puzzles they use in this game specifically became kind of obvious, and I was able to solve most of them with relative ease by just moving the mouse around in the same way I always have. It isn't a hard game, or even really engaging, but I'm more than willing to give the game a pass for it because it just charmed me so much. The presentation is just that good. That's kind of what I mean. It's not even really exclusive to horror. Like story-based games and visual novels and technical showcases, you can get away with a lot of really iffy gameplay elements if you hold true to certain genres, because you don't really play these games for the gameplay. It's meant to be an experience. Horror games are not designed with gameplay in mind. They are designed to scare you. Gameplay and horror are very hard to mix together. You focus too much on scary, then it just becomes a movie with extra steps. You focus too much on gameplay, then it can become distracting from the scary, to the point where it's just a normal game. But it's not mutually exclusive. You can have terrific gameplay while still eliciting fear. And the games that are able to achieve this just so happen to be some of my absolute favorites of the horror genre. And there's one of them that I would really like to show you today, because I feel as though it is criminally underrated for what I believe is one of the best horror games of all time. Little Nightmares. This game is pretty good. I first heard about this game in a Nintendo Direct in it was 2018, I think. It was definitely a while after the game released. The Switch port came later. I don't remember much, just that it intrigued me for all the wrong reasons. So this was at a point in my life where I was trying to get into horror a bit more, because I hadn't explored the genre much. Like literally, not even movies or books or anything. I was such a fucking puss for it. But I did know a few things, like some of the more popular movies and some characters, and I'll be real with you. Just this once, when I saw this in the trailer, I thought it was Georgie. I think the new It movie had recently come out on DVD, and my family got it and were watching the shit out of it because they loved it so much. I didn't watch, I just saw it through the stained window because they kicked me out of the house so they could watch their precious movie without me crying. So when I saw this, my immediate thought was, oh, neat. It's a horror game which has a bunch of classic horror movie characters chasing you around, and you play as the kid from It. It's like, what? Even if this kid was Georgie, it would have just been an It game. Why did I think it was based around a bunch of horror movies? Maybe the name is what, I don't know. Keep in mind I was 14. I'd never seen a horror movie before in my life. All I knew was Little Raincoat equals Pennywise or something. However, despite my misconception that was clearly their own fault, I went ahead and picked up this steamy pile of false advertising to give it a whirl as my first ever horror game. And let me tell you, I picked such a great game to start. It was so good that when I explored other games in the genre, I realized that I had been thoroughly spoiled in that I don't really like horror that much. Little Nightmares is a horror platformer released on April 28th, 2017 on all major platforms, excluding the Switch, the port of which came out later on May 18th, 2018, almost a year later. Now, some of you might say, well, why did you wait for the Switch port? Why didn't you just play the game on a different console? You own different consoles, don't you? And to that, I say, no. The game was published by Bandai Namco and was developed by Hazy Studios, who before this was well known for the creation of the Little Big Planet 1 and 2 DLC and the entirety of Little Big Planet 3. They had made a few games here and there, but their big breakthrough was Little Nightmares, their first game to be a huge breakout success, completely earned, I might add. Taking place on a strange island fortress known as the Maw, the game follows the adventures of a little girl named Six, as she makes her way through the catacombs, dodging enemies and solving puzzles with the point of escaping before something bad happens. At least, that's what you would assume, but this game is smart. It doesn't outright tell you anything, it more so shows it to you. The game starts out as Six wakes up from a nightmare involving some strange lady. By the way, dreams are important in this game. And like all other horror games, ever. We can see that she set up shop here in this little suitcase with blankets and stuff. She even went as far as to decorate a little bit. It's clear that she's been here for a very long time. Why is it now that Six decides to leave? Food? Her friends are in danger? Or maybe she's just too scared to stay anymore? It's part of our job to find out. It's a tad dark, but thankfully we have a lighter. Why does she have a lighter? We'll never know. And you make your way out of your hiding place, crawling through vents like you do a lot in this game and in this series, up a flight of stairs past an amazing shot, right past a collectible because you don't give a fuck, and you end up upon an old man who may or may not be having a bit of a bad day. This room acts as a small tutorial for how many of the puzzles will work in this game. You can't just open the door. You're a kid and you can't reach, so you have to move the chair and open it by the handle. This is important. It established the fact that the game is going to... in college... This is important because it established the fact that the game is going to acknowledge that you are a child, and that many of the puzzles you'll find yourself in will play off the idea that you are more agile than other monsters, and that you can fit into small places, and that everything around you is just a little bit too high to fucking reach. Takes me back, I tell you, back to stacking 75 kitty chairs to make a makeshift ladder so I could get the cookies on the top shelf. That was last week. Yeah, but still. Also, this room is the first of many examples about how this game merges its elements together. The Hangman is a disturbing sight for sure. It'll definitely set the tone in your mind. It definitely did for me. When I saw this, I just had the purest feeling of, I've made a horrible mistake. However, it isn't so disturbing that it distracts you from the goal of getting to the next room. And getting to the next room isn't so crucial right now that you don't notice the man. But here's the genius part. This game sets up the puzzle in such a way that forces interactivity with what the designers are actually trying to scare you with. In order to open the door, you have to use the chair that the man used to hang himself, which means this set of pixels here that is designed to scare you needs to be directly interacted with to complete your task. In order to play the game, you have to interact with its horror. Moving on, you're supposed to climb up here, but BT-dub, this game has secrets. A great way to encourage multiple playthroughs, I might add. A small tutorial teaching you how to jump and how to climb and how to avoid horrifying poop monsters, and you're on your way. I died thrice here. There is no fighting in this game, no combat of any kind. If you are spotted, you need to run, and then you need to hide. It's a super fun concept, not necessarily that it's a stealth game, but also that it's a platformer. Like, actually, it's not a horror game with jumping mechanics. There are entire segments for platforming. You can climb up walls and jump off them. You can build momentum to jump farther. This game is designed around you being able to jump. It is a platform game. And I just think that's very cool. It's like my favorite genre, and there isn't a lot of horror games that do this, so it's super awesome to see, especially when it's combined with other genres like stealth. I mean, I'm sure they exist, but I can't think of a ton of games that combine them both. I'm actually a little shocked that there isn't a ton of stealth platformers, because It just feels like a supernatural fit. Stealth requires you to be more careful, and platforming can be designed in such a way that requires careful thought and precision. So, like, do you see, like, where those two ideas may sync together? When you marry these two, you end up with an experience that requires you to be in constant awareness of your surroundings, taking a moment of time to actually thoroughly think through what needs to be done and the steps and inputs required to do it. You know a group of designers are a collective genius when they're able to make a game that is designed in such a way where you need to focus on many different aspects at the same time almost constantly, but also in such a way that it never feels like it. It makes it feel natural. You may not even realize that you're focusing on so much, but you absolutely are. And I just love it. It gives this game such a strong identity. So we keep going and we come across a different kind of rope this time, signifying one of two things. Either A, this is the path 6 used to escape the first time and she's going back for some reason, or B, 6 isn't the first person to have escaped. Oh, you can jump while climbing. I wonder if this game has fall damage. Whee! A hop, a skip, and a jump, and here we have a playground, meaning that whatever this place is, kids are here often, and they're even given a few small luxuries. Ah, the high life. Into the next room we go, and this game wastes no time showing off everything it's got. After this room, you will become aware of this game's amazing puzzle design alongside its general gameplay and even a few small snippets of lore, all of which in one of the very first puzzles. So you walk into the room and let's just imagine for a second that you are not my idiot brother playing this game for the first time and you realize that this is a horror game and you shouldn't gun-ho into a room with no hesitation at all. You take it carefully, slow, and then boom! What the hell is that? It makes a loud noise after it's activated for the first time, and every single time it moves, signaling that you should probably stop. Thankfully for you though, every time the light shifts, you can see a little snippet of the room more clearly, and with this, we become aware of a few more important details. Number one, as the light shifts, we can see a few small statues in the light. They aren't normal statues though, they are very much the same height as children, and they are very much in the light, and they are very much trying to block it as if the light is causing them pain. From this, we can confidently determine the kid's fucking dead. It's like really, really dead. So the child is stoned, and we can determine that the light is the most likely culprit. Thankfully, the shadows show you that there are places to hide from the light in these scenarios. We carefully hide behind such objects and make our way through to the next area. But see, this is what I mean. In just one puzzle, we learn that this place is a highly secured base that doesn't want people sneaking around. Yet, for some reason, there are children here? How did they get to a place like this? It's almost as if whatever got them here doesn't want them getting out, rather than them getting in. This puzzle also acts as a general statement for how the vast majority of this game is going to be. Your job is not to fight or even to save others, it is to sneak around your obstacles and keep making progress no matter what. It is to use stealth to your advantage and to avoid confrontation at all costs. And here's another genius thing that I guarantee you was not intentional at all. If you do get caught into the light, you don't die immediately. You slowly turn to stone and you have a chance to crawl back into the shadows. It's very hard to do, but if you are in a good position, you can pull it off. This is actually how the rest of the game and all of the enemies act. Mostly. Stealth is encouraged, but if you are found and you are being chased, you are able to run and hide. And eventually, anything looking for you will lose sight and give up. If you do get caught, it isn't instant death. You can run if you're skilled. I'll tell you, this impressed me so much. It's the first big interaction of the game, aside from the rope and the rope. It's so well crafted, and it shows off so much of this game's unique style and charm without a single text box to its name. It's the very first puzzle. Lore, style, and mechanics with nuances to those mechanics in one single puzzle. Needless to say, after seeing this, I was very excited. Okay, so a slight spoiler warning going forward. I'm going to talk about the first major area of the game and nothing else, but a lot of the events in this game are very, very, very well suited to be experienced for the first time when you're playing this game. It's not really the type of game that you can just watch and get the same experience. So if what I've told you so far has piqued your interest, I can't recommend enough that you check out Little Nightmares. You won't regret it at all. I promise you. And secondly, before you ask, yes, I will be playing through the majority of this game with the GameStop branded GameCube controller because you can't stop me. And thirdly, I'm not a game designer. I have a very, 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 very basic understanding of game design. So keep that in mind. If you disagree with anything I say, it's safe to assume that I'm probably wrong. So on to the game we go. The console isn't plugged in. It's just a blue screen. Here we are in a room full of children. The kiddos are sleeping, and then someone starts to open the door, and anyway, after that shit stain, you just walk off to the right and start to die of hunger. Well, alright, I guess it was food after all. Thankfully, someone helps us by giving us a piece of bread, but we're not going to be able to rely on other people's kindness forever. So going forward, we gotta be careful. Hey, look, another one. Go in and climb in so I can get up top and reach the switch. It doesn't look like it, but there is a very specific path to climb up. It's like a vertical maze. Alright, so check this out. You have to use these cabinets to climb up, but they open like normal filing cabinets, and I love that. It's a great example of the realism that's implied to this game's puzzle design, and that doesn't mean that I think Stretch Armstrong over there is realistic or anything. I'm saying that this puzzle makes sense in the context of what we're given. Why is the switch up there where we can't reach? Well, it's because we are a child, and we aren't supposed to be here in the first place. The only person that is supposed to be here, the janitor, is as tall as a normal adult. So the switch to open the door is placed in where it's convenient for him to just reach out and grab. But we are a child and we are small, so the puzzle here is opening the filing cabinet so we can climb up and pull it. But the cabinets get stuck like normal filing cabinets, so we have to open them in a very specific way. They could have just as easily made it a sliding block puzzle with a lightning power-up and floating in midair, but no, they decided to stick with the theme of a child running from a monster, and they designed their game around that theme. It's just like the chair puzzle from earlier. This kind of stuff shows up a lot in this game. They really play on the idea that everything around you is designed for something much bigger, and I really love that. When everything is designed in such a way that a monster wouldn't look out of place, it creates the idea in your mind that a monster could be anywhere. Especially considering that that monster can pretty much go anywhere. You see that door to the left? What do you think is beyond it? You may be inclined to think that there's no way that the monster could be behind it because there's no way they could have climbed up, but you don't think that because the monster has shown that he can use exits and doors in ways that we can't. There might be a staircase or an elevator beyond that door that we simply can't use. That monster could very much be on the level that we're at. Why else would the switch be designed for him to just so easily reach? It creates a constant sense of anxiety because little touches like this solidify the idea that pretty much nowhere in this world is a confirmed safe place. the hell are they doing to these kids that they need to trap them in cages? And why am I literally using the cage a child is in to make progress? Swing. Again, this is what I mean about the game creating puzzles around its scary elements. You're not moving a sliding wooden box or something to reach the switch. You're using a cage that a child is trapped in, and you can't help them. You just have to use them as a tool and then leave them to... The process of solving the puzzle itself becomes scary. The core gameplay becomes scary. Okay, so here's where the best part of the game comes in. The stealth mechanics and the sneaking. The floor we are on creaks, but the paper doesn't, so we walk on the paper very slowly and approach the janitor, who appears to be wrapping up a child for some reason. Getting a bit closer to him, we can actually see him without an unbridled sense of panic because he doesn't know we're there yet. So we can get a closer look and see that he's actually blind. So him seeing us isn't the problem, but him hearing us might be. And that's exactly what it is. We gotta sneak past him without making a sound. Whatever he hears, he will rush towards it and search. The creaking floors is bound to attract him, so we gotta jump and quickly dive into this open cage to hide before he can get us. Or attempt to run past him like an idiot. He'll run over in our general direction, but he won't look inside the cage, so he'll just go back to what he was doing. So we wait carefully, then we climb on top of the cage, and with a well-calculated jump, we leap over to the other piece of cloth on the other side of the room, narrowly avoiding him. That was awesome. The next puzzle is much simpler, though. It's just a simple crate that we just turn and it opens the latch to jump down. It's pretty squeaky, though. I'm not entirely sure the point of... Do shoes symbolize something in Sweden? Or Japan? Oh, okay. No. This game loves to play with narrow points. A lot of sequences are set up just right to the point where even if you're perfect, you will just barely avoid it. It gives a great sense of panic. Kind of like this. And this. Here's another good one. You know the sound of the door will attract him, so you gotta get ready to run. So you throw the shoe at the button, and then you rush down the hallway, knowing that he's going to chase after you, because what else are you supposed to do in this room? There's nothing else to interact with. But as you're running, the clocks go off, and he isn't able to hear you moving down the hallway anymore. By the time you're there, you've made it to the cloth, and he can no longer hear your footsteps. This lets you as the player know that certain sounds are able to distract him, which we will immediately make use out of in the next puzzle. You're in a hallway, and you need a crank in the room opposite of where you are. So you walk atop the shelves and drop things to make him move to certain spots. In the next room, you're able to get the crank, and you're ready to go out, but then you realize that the floor is too squeaky to sneak by him, and you can't climb with something in your hands. Not that it matters anyway, because the door is locked. So what do? You turn on the TV, grab the crank, and slowly make your way over there without making too much noise while he's distracted by the TV. He'll rush in to investigate the TV, and then you can just walk out because the TV itself is enough to mask any noise you'll make in this room. However, it isn't enough to mask the sound of the crank, so you gotta... But see, this is what I mean. This game is scarily good at making great puzzles while still implementing horror. The clue that told you that the janitor would be distracted by the TV wasn't just subtle, it wasn't just hinted at, it was shown to you directly through a chase scene. The act of you running away from a monster is what gave you the clue on how to avoid that monster. Not only does this game strive to be good alongside its scary, it uses its horror to enhance the game. It uses its horror to implement new concepts and then designs the game around it. How many horror games are able to not only introduce new concepts and mechanics like normal games, but also have those concepts be directly rooted into its core design? It's great! Doesn't mean it's immune to cheap jump scares. But hey, what are you gonna do? And just like that, we're on the boss fight. Door closes, so we slide under Indiana Jones style. but there's a crate so it doesn't close all the way, and he's able to sneak his arms under it, so we have to get too close to it and rip the bars off and chop his arms in half. You mosey on through the vent to the next major area as you can literally hear him cry out in agonizing pain. Every single puzzle in this section so far, from a door to a boss, has everything to do with forcing you to get up close and personal. Everything is designed in a way that will scare you by doing it. You aren't solving puzzles and getting scared separately, you are getting scared as a result of trying to solve puzzles. So that was Little Nightmares, or at least as much as I'm willing to divulge. I could go on to explain the rest of the game, but it's just way too good to just spoil it for anyone who hasn't played it yet. I just can't recommend that you play this game enough. I will say though that it's really strongest in its first area. The puzzle design is superb throughout, but it feels like in later eras they didn't have as many in favor of more traditional horror elements. Thankfully though, it was anything but abandoned, because this design is even stronger in the DLC and in the sequel, which I might talk about a little later. But this game and this series overall is a great example of everything I feel like a horror game can and should be. I personally don't feel as though a lot of horror games try to be good games as well as good horror experiences. I feel as though a lot of horror games really zero in on the experience itself rather than taking into consideration other elements that make games good. And I personally feel as though if a lot of people sat down to make a horror game, they would focus first and foremost on making the game scary and then let other things like gameplay become an afterthought. And I understand that it's a genre that is defined by the experience rather than the game itself, but the reason that horror games are kind of iffy in actual gameplay is that when they were in their infancy and still growing, there wasn't a whole lot of ways to combine horror and gameplay effectively. In the day, when games let themselves be games, they weren't all that scary, even when they tried to be. But when games tried to be scary, they were forced to take inspiration from other horror-based medias, to use tactics that those medias use in order to effectively inspire the same feelings, which in turn made them more interactive experiences than games. But that was then, and this is now, and now games are capable of so much more, and this kind of merging of experience and interactivity is more possible than ever before, which is why it frustrates me that more people aren't doing it. And that when people do it, sure, it gets a lot of attention, but it loses it just as quickly. Little Nightmares deserves to be among some of the greatest horror games of all time in my opinion, but instead, whilst popular, the community and the fan base and the sales still feels kind of small compared to what I feel like it should be. And it just feels unfair that when horror games have less and less gameplay, they seem to be seen by many as far more scary. For example, let's take a step back and talk about Happy Game a bit more, and why I believe while it's still a good experience, its whole approach to design is the polar opposite of Little Nightmares. So right out the gate, you'll notice that this game's style is great. It has this sort of art style where everything has a lot of detail, but the movements are still very stiff and jagged, and it makes it feel very unnerving. The second thing you'll notice is this game's sound design. The main character's voice actor did a great job portraying different kinds of emotions into small breaths and meaningless babbles. And the same can be said for everything around you. All the sound in this game perfectly gives off the feeling that the visuals are going for. This sort of childlike glee and excitement that is tainted by the world that it's in. So we wake up from a nightmare, let me just cross that out of the list, and the child gets out of bed, and then we just walk to the right to the first puzzle. We take this bear out of the box to start. The point of this puzzle is to manipulate the toys in such a way where they are disrupted and become sad. We tear off the clown head, and use the Russian dolls as a bell. Then we do this. And they drop a soccer ball on their way out. Through a cutscene, we learn that this ball is actually ours, but it was stolen, and we have to chase after it so we can become happy again, I guess. Anyway, that's the goal of this world. Chase right after the ball and solve puzzles. We then see a simple cup lifting puzzle. The heads of these dolls are on the wrong one, so we open and close the cups to fix them. Opening the cup reveals different parts of the toys that are under the other ones. Our character can hold something, so we grab onto them and keep them, and then we move them around and we fix all the toys. The cups then come to life and start partying. And then they die. Off we go to the next puzzle, and it's this thing. His hand causes his mouth to open, kind of like a crank, and then this thing comes out. And then it releases this, and we tear it in half, and then a half again, and then... And then there's this. The pulleys here move the hands, so we just move the hands and put them on the cheeks. Then we use the hands to move and lift the head so it'll spill the ball. And then this thing starts to turn evil and it chases after us. And this scene would be so intense if I was actually the one running from it. Then we come to the most in-depth puzzle so far. We fix each toy and play with it in a certain way to get a piece to fix the next. First we pull out the Russian doll. Then we take the horn from the cowboy. Put it on the train and pop the bubbles to get the turnkey. Then we take the head of the racer. Then we rip off the sheep's head and get the drumstick. Steal the rabbit head for the teddy. And continuously rip off its head until we find a human one for the doll. Then we rip it open to get a piece of the cube. Beat the thing in its own game to get the duck's head, and squeeze out a little bit of blood to lift a clown out and get a block. This bear will come out and dance with matches, so you press the other blocks in the right time to get these things to jump out and light the candles. This teleports you to a cliffside where you can reach out and grab the ball. And that is the end of the first. So there you go. That was the first chapter of Happy Game, and this game is definitely scary, definitely disturbing, but it's not that engaging to someone who isn't scared by tradition. This is a school zone. You may have also noticed this timestamp right here that goes to the end of this section, and it was available the entire time. Now, if you had found yourself using it to skip past this section because you found it a tad bit boring, exactly. That is exactly what I am talking about. Okay, it's like I said before, the visuals and sound design are absolutely incredible. It is without a doubt this game's strongest asset and entirely what makes it the game it is and the whole reason why it's gotten the decent scores that it has gotten. This game is really disturbing, man. Everything is designed to just creep you the hell out. But my problem with this game is that its presentation is not only its strongest draw, but its only draw. The puzzles themselves are as simplistic as I explain them. I tried to talk about Little Nightmares puzzles in simplest terms for people watching this, and tried to only go in depth when the puzzles themselves stood as a good example of this game's core design philosophy. For people who are not scared or disturbed by it, then there is nothing else this game has to offer as an experience. It's very clear that the developers set out to make this game disturbing first and foremost, and to use that disturbing imagery to tell a compelling story, and for that, they succeeded beautifully, and I take my hat off to them. But you can't rely solely on visual elements for an interactive experience. That ruins the whole point. They could have easily just taken the cursor away and then just played the game and put the footage of them playing the game up as some sort of animation or as a short film that you just watch, and it would have had the same impact because you get the same feelings of fear and off-put by playing this game that you would from watching it, which is inexcusable for a video game because the whole point of games is that they're one of the only at-home media that is directly affected by its viewer. Again, please don't feel as though that I believe this is a bad game. I simply believe that it's far too simple for its own good. I mean, think of point-and-click games like Fran Bow and Deep Sleep. Those games had a lot of elements that made the puzzles more complicated just by proxy. You could have multiple items at once. Most items are used in areas other than when you found them. Some puzzles take place between multiple areas. Some items require their own puzzles to get them. Solutions are presented cryptically and through dialogue, but dialogue could mislead you or straight up not be talking about what you need, or even just lie to you. Some puzzles needed multiple items. Sometimes you could combine or interact with items to make new ones. Sometimes you have to think outside the box to find the way to use those items. Some puzzles have multiple solutions. Both games had unique ways of interacting with the world. Both games had sort of free roam, where puzzles open up different pieces of the world, but not one at a time, and multiple areas are always available, while progression is locked behind exploration and interaction. The goal is not immediately obvious. How to use an item is not immediately obvious. Items don't solve puzzles in the order you found them. An item found 3 rooms ago can be used to solve the next puzzle. Puzzles themselves are not solved in the order you find them. You often have to make progression to get new items to go back to puzzles in previous areas that you had to skip before. Some segments have puzzles that can be solved without an order. You are encouraged to interact with characters in the environment because dialogue can clue you in on what you do and potentially give you an item, etc., etc. In Happy Game, the most complex thing about these puzzles is that your character can hold on to an item and just keep it for when you need it, which I'm pretty sure isn't required more than like 10 times throughout the entire game. You just drag a thing to a thing until a thing happens, and That's not to say there aren't segments that are a bit head-scratching, but even then, all the pieces are in front of you and nothing else. So when you do come across something, even if you're not sure what exactly you have to do, you'll probably do it anyway. For example, the next major area takes place in this weird bunny world. The first puzzle, this little guy goes down the hole, and when you try to go down the hole, this huge bunny tries to eat you. The only other thing in this area is bunnies and carrots. What you're supposed to do is feed the bunnies so that they can't get away, so the big one eats them and slows him down so you can make it to the hole first. You wouldn't know that just by playing, but these two things are the only thing in the area, so even if you didn't know that was the solution, what else are you supposed to try? The next puzzle is the same concept, but there's this huge carrot that you need multiple bunnies to rip out. What you're supposed to do is use this guillotine to cut the bunnies up to make more of them. You wouldn't know that cutting the bunnies with a guillotine would make more bunnies, right? That's ridiculous. How are you supposed to know that? But then again, the only two things here are the guillotine and the bunnies. So even if you didn't think that was the answer, there is nothing else that you could possibly try to do. There is one solution, and the game straight up shows you what it is and absolutely nothing else. The next area, you try the hole once and you find out that these guys get killed when the thing runs past them. And there are guillotines here, so you know what exactly you have to do. You use these little guys to weigh down the tethers so that the guillotines stay up and slice them when they explode. But even if you didn't know these little guys explode, the guillotines are the only thing here, so of course you would need to use it, and of course these guys would weigh them down. And look, this segment is meant to be complex. I can tell. These guys explode when they're sad, and exploding them is how you get the proper pieces to set up the trap, and they get upset when you do very specific things. The challenge here is figuring out what it is that upsets them and how to accomplish that, but you can just blindly mess with them and then you'll stumble across the answer anyway. That's exactly what I did. I just dragged them around and put them in random places and just tossed things around and just messed with them, and I eventually got it. I legitimately have no idea what I did. In fact, I got the trap set up and didn't even realize I solved the puzzle and just kept aimlessly poking around at everything until I realized that I was done. I had to look up what it even is that I did. Now, you could make the argument that if everything comes naturally, then that's actually a sign of good game design. But if you can accidentally come across the answer to a puzzle without even realizing what you did, or even what the puzzle was in the first place, then what was the point of even including it? Now, normally in a game, this wouldn't be a problem, because even if a challenge is simple by nature, you still have to put in some thought into it. You can't just blindly mess around and then get it. Blindly messing around can maybe clue you in, or maybe help you find a missing piece, but it isn't always going to show a massive result. The problem with Happy Game is that the puzzles are too simplistic for its own good. The solution is too clear. The process of doing so is too natural. The mechanics are too minimalistic. It's just too easy. It's so easy. And yes, of course, I realize that simplicity doesn't automatically mean bad. Of course it doesn't, but there is a huge difference between something being simple and something just being a set of steps that you take. They move out of the way, give them a carrot. You need a carrot? Pull it out of the ground. You need these guys to stop on the guillotines? Just mess with them until you can take their stuff. There are segments that are more complex, a lot more complex, to the point where it's actually super fun and engaging. But in a game that's just solving a puzzle and moving on to the next in a straight line, having these more complex parts be so far apart from each other just makes the simple parts just feel so much longer because there's nothing in between them. It's just a straight line of puzzles. Solve a simple puzzle by dragging randomly, move forward. Solve a puzzle by dragging randomly, move forward, and then repeat over and over and over again until finally halfway through the entire game, you actually come across something that requires you to stop and to think. And even then, it's not that hard. And yes, I meant that literally. This segment is halfway through the entire game. However, like I said before, I'm willing to excuse all of that because the experience itself was just so cool. The environmental storytelling absolutely carries this game, and even though the process of seeing that story becomes kinda, yeah, I get it towards the end, if you were to ask me, I'd still probably give this game a 9 out of 10. If you're the kind of person who can immerse themselves in a world just by its visuals, or if you're a fan of cryptic, well thought out storytelling, then I can't recommend Happy Game to you enough. But if you're the kind of person who can easily turn off while playing a game, or if you just find yourself desensitized by modern horror tactics, or even if you find yourself judging gameplay over visuals, then I don't think I could recommend Happy. The thing about horror is that the scary factor is the main draw. Really? If anything is going to engage you in a horror game, then it's gonna be that. That's why horror games are designed around it. So if you don't find an experience scary, then what else is there to do? That's why it's a good idea to have another draw. It's a slippery slope though. It's not an easy thing to do. I mean, I'm talking about what Little Nightmares does like it's the most obvious thing in the world, but it really isn't. These two things are just so different from a design perspective. Stuff like platforming and puzzle solving take up very different parts of your brain compared to, oh god, run and please don't find me. It may seem obvious to build your game first and have it revolve around scary later, but it's not that easy. There's a reason why this kind of design is on the rarer side of things. It's because it's just really hard to do. Function over form is much easier said than done, especially when you consider that traditional horror is much simpler. Having something be solely imagery and or dialogue is not easy to make scary, but it's easier. When you add an extra layer of interactivity, you have to find a way to make the person playing feel as though they're part of the core experience. Okay, so how do we do that though? Well, the logical thing to do is to do a lot of the same thing, but have the player do it instead. Walk down a dark hallway, hide in a cupboard, show creepy imagery, tell a compelling story, and on a special occasion, smash something's face in with a blunt object. Those are the things that we associate with horror. That's the stuff that we see and we say, yup, that's scary, that's what makes a good experience. And for the most part, it does, because it just works. I don't like the way Happy Game's core gameplay is designed, but I can't call it a bad game because it isn't. I don't like the formula, but the formula still works. Horror games are meant to be an experience first and foremost. They are designed around impact and feel, and we can see how that mentality has shaped the games. Horror games are put into their own category. We consider horror games to be a genre, but they're not really a genre because a horror game can be any type of game. A horror game can be a platformer, a horror game can be an FPS, it can be a visual novel, it can be an action-adventure game, it can be a VR puzzle game, it can be a fucking slideshow. But even though they are capable of being any type of game, we somehow consider horror itself to be its own unique type of game. We are willing to excuse certain iffy elements of games because they claim to be scary, but should we? Is it fair to say that these games should be held to different standards just because the person making it claims that it's frightening? Especially when horror games have proven that they don't need to do that. They don't need to be held to different standards. They are capable of being just as good as normal games in the same way normal games do it. It feels like horror games, more so than any other type of game, are the easiest kind to slip. To sort of go off in a bad direction, because it doesn't really matter if it's engaging. If it's scary, it'll work. And it does work. Surprisingly, it really does work. People hold these games to different standards because it's justified. Because they're made in different ways. If anything, it's impressive that horror games can stand on their own while still being so drastically different from the rest of the industry. I'm not a designer, man. I know I don't really have any place to talk. I'm sure making this stuff is hard. I'm just basing my opinion based on what I see in front of me. And what I see in front of me is a small subset of games that is willing to sacrifice many things about it for this one thing that claims to give it an identity. And something else I see is an even smaller set of games that show that it doesn't have to be that way. That shows that being frightening, while very effective, maybe isn't this all-encompassing trump card that obliterates any and all need for basic game design 101. Let me ask you something. Let's say that you are making a platformer. How important is it that you ensure that the general mechanics of running and jumping is good? Obviously, it's very important, and it's definitely something that should take up a good chunk of your attention, but just because it's a platformer doesn't mean that running and jumping is the only thing that matters or ever will matter. What happens when you start to obsess over it? What happens when you abandon other important things of game design, all for the sole purpose of preserving the basic feel of running and jumping? What do you get when you abandon all other mechanics and replayability and like half of the possible interesting stuff you could have done with the sole purpose of making sure that your press's running and jumping stays intact? Answer New Super Mario Bros. Horror games are very much defined around the feel of playing it rather than the actual game that you're playing, and for the most part it works a treat because I guarantee you I'm probably the only fucker who actually cares about this. I mean, how many people do you know that consider the complex nature a single puzzle has on the player's engagement whilst being chased by a cracked out Slender Man? But I think the lesson here is that even if something works, it doesn't necessarily mean that nothing else can work. If you're an aspiring game designer or really looking to produce any media at all, you shouldn't be afraid to try new things. Because in an industry led by innovation and new ideas, it's shocking to me that only recently we see horror games that are willing to take a more creative approach with a unique idea. Poppy's Playtime, for example, was a horror game that stemmed from an idea, not an idea stemming from a horror game. It's a game built around that idea. Just like most other games out there, it took a concept and gave that concept function and then added form to the function. I want to see more stuff like that, big new games with creative ideas and well thought out gameplay surrounding. I want to see more stuff like Little Nightmares, a game that not only prioritizes its horror and its general gameplay, but marries the two to the point where it never feels like they're completely different aspects of its design. Again, not a game designer at all. I don't know what I'm talking about. And I'm sure more stuff like this exists out there, but it's not easy to find a needle in a haystack. Because a lot of horror games, at least to me, just feel like hallway simulators with murder clowns in them. Who knows, when this video comes out, I could get like 30 people pointing me towards large portions of games that take the genre in an amazing direction, and maybe I've just been looking in the wrong places this whole time, and horror is actually this grandiose experience of incredibly complex and well thought out provoking gameplay, something that I could only dream of. And those are the people that I'll block.